In the series Road to 1066, you'll be guided through the events that led to the Norman invasion in the year 1066 in detail. This series will end with the situation in 1066 and the absolute mess that transpired. This episode will go over the early Anglo-Saxons and their kings of England. One of the first tribes to inhabit the area of modern England and Wales were the Britons. The Britons were Celtic and Christian. They were invaded by the Romans in approximately 55 BC. The Romans only got to the border between England and Scotland, back then inhabited by a tribe called the Picts. In fact, the Picts were such a thorn in the Roman side that they had to build a wall called Hadrian's Wall between modern England and Scotland to keep the Picts out. In 476 CE, the Roman Empire fell, leaving the Britons to govern themselves. The thing that was unfortunate for the Britons was that soon after the Roman Empire fell, the Picts broke through the wall and started fighting the Britons. Because the Britons couldn't deal with the Picts themselves, they hired Germanic warbands to help defeat them. Some of the tribes hired were the Angles, Saxons, and the Jutes. Now, if you studied history enough, you know that hiring foreign armies tends to be a bad idea. It was a bad idea here because the Angles and Saxons decided to invade England. Eventually they did succeed, but fortunately for the Britons, the Angles and Saxons didn't think it was worth it to invade Wales, so the Britons stayed there. Eventually the Angles and Saxons merged into one culture called the Anglo-Saxons. Eventually the Anglo-Saxons separated into 7 smaller kingdoms called Northumbria, Essex, Wessex, Sussex, Kent, Mercia, and East Anglia. All of these small kingdoms fought with each other over the years. At first the Anglo-Saxons were pagan, converted to Christianity in 597. The feuding between kingdoms and division continued for about 3 more centuries, until, in the late middle of the 9th century, the legendary Viking, Ragnar Lothbrok, started ravaging England. He was eventually captured by Aela, king of Northumbria, who allegedly threw Ragnar in a snake pit to die. This led to Ragnar's sons, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Hvitserk, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, to try to invade England in 865, like the Anglo-Saxons did previously. Many Anglo-Saxons resisted the invasion. One such man was Alfred. Alfred was the brother of Ethelred, the king of Wessex, and Alfred was married to a Mercian princess. Because of this marriage, Wessex and Mercia were allied. When the Vikings swept into Mercia in 868, Wessex was obligated to come to its aid. For a long time, little progress was made beating back the Vikings. Things were seemingly made even worse when Ethelred died, leaving Alfred as the king of Wessex in 871. Alfred continued fighting against the Vikings in Mercia until it was finally taken in 874, and its king, who was also Alfred's brother-in-law, was driven into exile. Despite the death of his brother and the fall of Mercia, King Alfred kept resisting, but it was clear that the Vikings had the upper hand in this war. In the January of 878, they attacked Chippenham, where Alfred was staying for Christmas. The attack forced Alfred to flee to the marshes of Somerset, where he continued fighting and managed to train another army. By this point, all other kingdoms had fallen, leaving Wessex surrounded by occupied territory. In the middle of 878, his new army fought against the remaining Vikings in the Battle of Edington, which proved to be a decisive victory for King Alfred. During the next years that followed, Alfred united the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, including Mercia, that were still not ruled by the Vikings, under his banner. There was also the Danelaw, which was territory that was controlled by the Vikings. Then in 885, Alfred started pushing the Vikings back, recapturing London in 886. Then he declared himself the King of the Anglo-Saxons. England was still far from united and partially under the Danelaw. Part of why he managed to defeat the Vikings was that Alfred was an excellent military commander. He reorganized his army and used the ships that the Vikings had to his advantage and in the war. Because of his deeds when repelling the Vikings and his actions when king of the Anglo-Saxons, Alfred became known as Alfred the Great. He improved laws, he invited scholars from mainland Europe, and eventually even learned Latin. The impressive thing is that Alfred was known to be sick a lot during his long life. His one failure during his reign was that he couldn't get his subjects interested in monasticism again. When he died in 899, he had established England, or Wessex, as a powerful and united nation once again. Edward the Elder was Alfred's son and successor. His biggest achievement is managing to drive the Vikings out of Northumbria and East Anglia, leaving York as the last Viking stronghold in England. He passed away in 924. Edward's son, Aelstan, inherited the throne. It was during his reign that the Vikings were finally gotten rid of and out of York, and therefore all of England. Aelstan would also improve the Anglo-Saxon laws further. He died in 939. Another one of Edward's sons was named Edmund, and he inherited next and is known as Edmund the Magnificent. The biggest event in his reign was Olaf Guthred's son, the Norse king of Dublin, taking Northumbria, and Edmund having to reclaim it. He reigned 7 years, dying in 946. Edred was Edward's third son, and the one to be king next. The Northumbrians seem to have decided that another Viking, Eric Bloodaxe, would be a better king than Edred, so Edred ravaged Northumbria to stay loyal. He died in 955. Also, just so you know, the Vikings, this is the last we see of them. They're never gonna return, never, totally never, and they're not gonna feature in the rest of England's history, so, yeah. The next king was Edwig, Edmund the Magnificent's son. We don't know much about him, but his short reign of 4 years seems to be tainted with civil unrest. We do know that late in his reign the Mercians and Northumbrians revolted in favor of Edwig's brother Edgar as their king. Edwig died in 959. Edgar ruled next. He was the king that finally revived monasticism, which was something that Alfred the Great failed to do. He also founded many churches and abbeys. His reign was generally regarded to have been very peaceful. He died in 975. Edgar's son was named Edward II, and he had the nickname the Martyr. Edward's reign was cut short in 978 by his assassination. Ethelred the Unready's succession was very troubled, because many people in the kingdom thought that Ethelred was part of the conspiracy to kill Edward the Martyr. And now is the time to think about, remember how I told you that the Vikings were never going to come back? Well, I lied about that. They are going to come back 2 years after Ethelred came to the throne. This time they tried to invade. They were led by Sweyn Forkbeard, who was possibly the great-great-great-grandson of Ragnar Lothbrok. Sweyn was already the king of Norway and Denmark. Despite Sweyn being a great Viking with a lot of resources and men at his disposal, it took him 33 years to be accepted as King of England in 1013. Ethelred the Unready fled into exile. However, Sweyn couldn't enjoy being king of 3 kingdoms for long, as he died in 1014. Ethelred then quickly ran out of exile into being king again. Unfortunately, Sweyn's son Canute was preparing his own invasion of England after being unfairly outmaneuvered out of the English throne by Ethelred. When Ethelred finally died in 1016, 2 years after Sweyn died, Canute had already started pillaging and destroying parts of England. Edwin II Ironside was Ethelred's brother and the next ruler of England. However, he, like the previous rulers, ruled for a short time, in this case less than a year, leaving Canute as the sole ruler of all of England.